let's transition to our next topic, where we're talking about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Like we need more acronyms and letters thrown around, but it kind of goes on this trend of this, a central currency and everything like that. Now, all of these nations. Now, we've spoken on this podcast about digital currencies, about cryptocurrency. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Erin on again to speak with us today. As one of our other directors of our company, she's a hobbyist in cryptocurrency, so she was busy; she couldn't join us today. But it goes along this theme of talking about a central currency, and we spoke about the dangers of having this central international currency. Now they're trying to bring in this central digital currency. Is there the same risks with that as we're talking about with the central currency internationally, Dr. Rod, or is it a whole different game?
Well, it's not really a parallel or competing system. So my understanding is that this is not a move to an international currency. It's possible that ultimately we will go back to that original plan post World War II and have an international currency. But the proposals at the moment are for individual central banks to have a digital currency. There are a number that already have them. Most of them are relatively small countries in the Caribbean, a few other places. The largest economy would be Nigeria. Nigeria have adopted a central bank digital currency. And certainly the United States, most of the other higher income countries, they've got policy papers out, lots of research is going on, and it's highly likely that a number of central banks will introduce their own digital currency over the next, say, 5 to 10 years.
And so when we say central bank, we're talking about like the national bank, right? Like the main bank of the country?
Not necessarily. No. A national bank is merely a bank that's got branches all over the country. So that can be a commercial bank. But virtually every country in the world has what we call a central bank or a reserve bank. In the United States, it's actually called the Federal Reserve System because it's made up of reserve banks in the various states. In Australia, it's called the Reserve Bank of Australia. In the United Kingdom, it's actually called the Bank of England. That is actually a special case, which we won't waste time on at the moment. But essentially, a central bank or a reserve bank acts as the government's bank. That is, it's the banker to the government, but it's also the banker for the banking system.
Yes.
And so individual banks, they settle their transactions among one another by going via the central or reserve bank. So in the case of Australia, for example, all the big banks, they actually have accounts at the Reserve Bank of Australia. And when they owe money to another bank, that debt is settled through the Reserve Bank. So they are, in most countries, with very few exceptions, such as the United Kingdom, they are a separate entity which has been established by the government to be the government banker and also banker to the rest of the banks and often the whole financial system.
Now
so they have an interest.
They're saying that this digital currency, this central bank digital currency, is going to be the same as paper money, as cash money. It's still it's going to be the same rate and all that sort of stuff. How does it then differ than my bank accounts, which are pretty much digital on my phone and in my bank account on my online? Like, how is it different? I know they're talking about there's advantages with the international payments and stuff like that, but if it's going to be the same, how is it different?
All right. Well, it will be like a parallel or alternative system for making payments and receiving money from overseas. That's the way I understand it. So it will work in pretty much the same way to international currency transactions as they happen today. The mechanism will be a little bit different. Now, I should add that the central bank digital currencies are not quite the same thing as cryptocurrencies, because cryptocurrencies are not controlled by government.
Yes.
And the technology behind them is what we call blockchain technology, which essentially, well, another term for that actually is distributed ledger accounts, which means the records of transactions are actually recorded in multiple computers, so they can't be manipulated. And generally with cryptocurrencies, there's a limit to the total amount of the currency that will be issued. It's a little bit like gold, really, like going back to a gold standard. The central bank digital currencies, they will be another kind of what we call fiat currency. They won't be backed by precious metals, for example, but they will be related to existing currencies such as the Australian dollar and the American dollar, because people will be swapping Australian dollars, US dollars, pounds sterling, and so on for digital currencies. So really, it's an alternative system for settling international financial transactions.
Okay. So it's not going to be the local currency.
I'm not aware of any central bank which is currently proposing that. There might be, but no, not really. So we won't all have an account with the central bank and use that to pay wages and to buy our groceries with and so on. Like in principle, we could. Yeah, we could in principle, but that's not going to happen, I don't think, in a hurry. So I know there are a lot of people very, very concerned about this, and there's no doubt the technology could be used for all sorts of nefarious purposes. That's the plain truth. And look, one of the reasons why a lot of conservative commentators are so concerned is that we saw the Canadian example of the truckers whose bank accounts were frozen because they did something the government didn't like. Absolutely. I mean, I was gobsmacked that this could happen in a nation calling itself a democracy. But this is what's triggered, I think, what's triggered so much concern, particularly among conservative and Christian commentators. They are concerned that governments will force us to use the digital currencies. So we'll all have a wallet for a digital wallet for our digital currency, and government could step in and stop our access anytime. The truth is they could. That's why people are so concerned about it.
Which they've proved that they can do anyway.
Like certainly with the Canadian example, yes, because they did anyway. I mean, I think that was, well, I don't even know a strong enough word to use for that because it's demonstrated that, look, if you don't trust your government, the whole system is going to fall apart. Yeah. And I think the Canadian government, they really did a major disservice to the whole democratic project through what they did. I think it was one of the worst things that's ever happened in terms of economics in human history.
Yeah.
Absolutely dreadful.
Going back to some of those bad things that we're talking about happen. Obviously, there's China have actually rolled out a trial. They're running a campaign of this, and there's fears that obviously China's already very big on tracking. Oh, what's the actual name of the? There's kind of like you've got this personal score where
that's sort of social credit, a kind of social credit score. That's correct.
That's the right. And that's one of the fears with this, isn't it? Because that then could be one central way that they're tracking everything and keeping an eye on everything, and then obviously be able to control your finances.
Oh yes, the technology is there, and it's been, I guess, creeping up on us, and more recently, I guess it's been leaping up on us. The question is, will it be used for that purpose? And I would say that it's become more likely following the behaviour of the Canadian government in relation to the truckers who were protesting against border closures and so on.
But that wasn't digital currency anyway. So they're already...
it wasn't digital.
Like,
it wasn't digital. No, that's right.
How's that different?
Well, certainly because the records are electronic and access to them is electronic, that's how the Canadian government was able to do that.
Yeah.
So, I sympathise with those. I think a lot of the commentators, they're probably over-egging it at the moment, but in terms of potential, I hate to say it, but they're right. I have people in my own church who are absolutely convinced of this. Maybe it's just a timing thing. I don't think it's something which will happen straight away. And I think there are all sorts of reasons why governments won't agree to an international a single international digital currency.
Yeah.
Technically, that means that all nations would have to give up using monetary policy as a tool of managing their economies. And we'd end up like countries like Spain and Italy during the global financial crisis, when those nations were threatened with bankruptcy because they were using the euro, so they didn't have their own currency. And I think that's one of the reasons why it'll be a long time yet before we agree to give up our own individual currencies and adopt an international currency. However, the technology is there, and we should be careful that we don't ridicule those who view it in a far more sinister way than I do. I don't think we've got there yet, but I'll definitely concede that the technology is there. All we need is a few more evil people.
So is this avoid it because of this whole conspiracy theory, or is it get on board? We need to be modern people and get with the times,
Look, I don't think we should live in fear.
Yeah.
I just think that, as individuals, there's not a lot we can do. We're not the ones who are making decisions. As I said a little earlier, we need to use, if we live in a democracy, we need to use our vote very, very wisely, prayerfully. We need to do the very best we can to have good people, good men and women in power. We need them in politics. We need them in business. We need them, throughout the economy. So we need to shift the general sorts of philosophies that apply at the level of politics and business and so on. That in other words, we've got to move, I think, take a step back from what some people would call wokeism. I think it's going to do damage to us all. But it's really hard. Look, I wouldn't advise a company, no, don't, whatever you do, use a central bank digital currency, because it's not the technology which is inherently evil. It's the people who are using it.
Which goes back to what you were saying about the vote, which is like, it's good. Don't be afraid of the technology, but be careful with who you vote to be in charge of that technology.
That's right.
Yeah. No, it's really good. Okay, so look, I think that was a really good advice from Dr. Roddies. Let's not live in fear. As leaders, let's not live in fear, but let's make sure we can influence the right things. Make sure we vote the right way. Make sure that we can be as much in control of the movements of these things they're happening anyway. Like Dr. Ross said, the technology is there. It's going to happen. So let's not be afraid of it, because we know that there's nothing to fear, because at the end of the day, our God is in control. So have complete faith, have wisdom and wariness as you're stepping forward. Don't be in fear, but use your vote. Vote with your money. Vote with your actual vote as well, and influence those around you. Use your influence to help educate, and I suppose that's a good word, is make sure we're educated as well and staying up on things. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.